Good day, everyone, and welcome to our online annual general meeting presentation. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic and social distancing requirements, we're unable to host an in-person annual general meeting this year, and so we're unable to give our normal presentation to shareholders. So this year, the alternative is a pre-recorded presentation that you can hopefully enjoy from the comfort and safety of your home office. Standing 2 meters away from me is JP Lachance, who is our Chief Operating Officer, and he's going to help me out with today's presentation, but we'll keep our distance. To start off today's presentation, just a plain language advisory on forward-looking statements. We're going to tell you all about our vision of Peyto's future today. We'll also tell you where we think commodity prices are going to go, and these are called forward-looking statements. We're going to be truthful and use everything we know about Peyto and the industry to predict the future, but we will likely be wrong on both accounts, almost certainly the commodity price. Oil and gas exploration and production is a risky business, so please do your homework before making any investment, and of course don't blame us if it doesn't work out. So the agenda for today's presentation will be as follows. First, we'll have a quick introduction for those less familiar with Peyto of who we are and what we do. Then I'd like to stand on my soapbox for a moment, if I can, and remind you all of the importance of the Canadian energy industry and what it does for you personally. I think it's important, particularly after what we've gone through now with this pandemic, to be reminded of some of the necessities of life, like our energy industry, that we all tend to take for granted. Next, I want to talk a bit about Peyto's long-term strategy as a business, and then I'm going to invite JP to come up and talk about our assets and the returns that we've delivered over the last year of operations. And then lastly, we'll finish up with what the future holds for Peyto and our industry. So just a quick introduction of who we are and what we do for those who aren't as familiar with Peyto. We've been a natural gas company now for over 21 years, focused exclusively on finding and developing natural gas and natural gas liquids in Alberta's Deep Basin. From day one, we've had a returns-focused strategy. In other words, we're in business to make a profit on the capital that we invest for our shareholders. And we know the best way to maximize that profit is to have the lowest cost that we can. And after 21 years, Peyto is well known and proud to be the lowest cost producer in the industry. We tend to achieve those low costs by owning and controlling the most important parts of our business, particularly from the reservoir to the sales meter. We are a dividend-paying corporation, and over our history, we've returned to shareholders over $1.50 of dividends for every dollar of equity we ever raised from them. And with only 50 full-time employees, we're an incredibly lean and efficient team here at Peyto. So that's who we are, but what is it specifically that we do? Well, we are a conventional exploration and production company. We shoot seismic and map geologic formations to identify commercially recoverable reserves. We contract service companies and design drilling and completion operations to drill and fracture stimulate horizontal gas wells. We build well site measurement and pipelines to gather production from the wells to central processing facilities. We build our own gas plants to process that production and to convert it into more consumable products like natural gas liquids, and condensates. These products are then used by Albertans every day to heat our homes, power our hospitals, and provide the electricity to keep the lights on, all across our province. And one day, we hope to share our responsibly and efficiently developed reserves with the rest of the world so that they too can graduate from more harmful fuels. Since the main reason for this unconventional annual general presentation is due to the pandemic, I thought I'd just let you know how we're handling it here at Peyto, both in our head office here and at our field operations. In the office, we have really an extremely small but seasoned staff that is self-motivated and used to working on their own without supervision, so this isn't a big change for them to work from home. All staff have remote access to their office workstations, and we've equipped them all with extra monitors and computers to be fully functional from their home sites. We really have very few meetings here at Peyto anyway, and have provided everyone with a multitude of communication tools to stay connected. We've had to beef up, of course, our cybersecurity and our IT support because everybody's become a super user now, but that's fine. The field operations are ongoing, and we're also ready to invoke any number of emergency response plans that we have for the field to deal with an outbreak of COVID in our field staff. So far, we haven't had anything for them. We're all stocked up on chemicals and parts so that we can avoid any interruption to supply chains. We're an active member of the Energy Mutual Aid Co-op, which allows us to lean on other operators in the field in the event that we do have an outbreak, and of course they can lean on us as well. So there's a good community out there in the field that works cooperatively together. We already have full remote control of all of our well sites and production, as well as monitoring capability of those wells and control over our gas plants. Breakup is generally a slow time anyway. This spring breakup has been fairly normal, and it looks like we're going to come out of breakup here with both Alberta and Canada and really the rest of the world starting to restart their economies and open up. So hopefully we're on the backside of this pandemic. So that's just a brief introduction of us. I also want to take a few moments today just to remind everybody of the relative importance of the Canadian energy industry in our lives. For instance, if we look at the significance of the energy industry to Canada's gross domestic product, or a measure of our economy, the energy industry is a major contributor. Of course, we all knew that, but it's good to be reminded sometimes of just how significant. For instance, in 2018, the industry contributed around $220 billion, or close to 11% to the Canadian economy, both through direct and indirect activity. Coincidentally, Canada's healthcare system spent about the same amount in 2018, or 11% of GDP. So you could say that it's the energy industry that allows Canada to have such an amazing and inclusive healthcare system. And I'm sure we'd all agree that at a time like this, we want to have the best healthcare system that we can for every Canadian. So maybe it would be good for every Canadian to keep that in the back of their mind, that oil equals healthcare. That's just one of the reasons that every Canadian should want and need a thriving energy industry in this country. Now, hopefully we've been all able to avoid using the healthcare system over the last couple of months, but if we did, we would have been reminded of some of the other essential things that oil and gas becomes. Things like ventilators and medicines and masks and tubes and sanitizers. Everywhere we look in our daily lives, in fact, there are products derived from oil and gas. For instance, did you know that over half of a Tesla Model 3 is made from oil-derived products? Whether it's tires or dashboards or door handles. Ironically, you can't make an electric vehicle that doesn't burn oil without using a lot of oil. Oil and gas is everywhere in our lives, from sporting equipment to our electronics to our clothes. From our personal products like shampoo and makeup to our shaving cream that we use every morning. Even our homes and backyards are filled with products derived from oil and gas. Just look around you and you'll be astonished at just how widespread oil and gas is in our daily lives, and really how lucky we are to have it. And then be thankful that we have a responsible domestic industry here in Canada that can provide it. Since oil and gas products are everywhere in our daily lives and we continue to be seeing them for the foreseeable future, we believe that Canada should be the supplier of choice for that feedstock. Canadian oil and gas checks all the boxes, from environmental to ethical to human rights. And we have some of the largest deposits of oil and gas in the world. And we have the resources and the know-how in the people of Canada and our industry to be a world leader in oil and gas supply. We all know oil and gas is not dead. Demand for both is continuing to grow at a rapid pace, particularly natural gas, as more and more countries around the globe are switching from dirtier fuels like coal to cleaner fuels like natural gas. That's how we make a positive impact on the environment, by using cleaner fuels. Over the last couple of months, those societies that have shut down their coal-powered factories are witnessing clearer skies and cleaner air. They all want that to continue. So is it any wonder that they're gearing up to import more and more liquefied natural gas? Over the last decade, China, India, South Korea, and Japan have doubled their LNG imports. They want to use cleaner fuels. And we need to encourage that and get them our extra natural gas so that they can continue to move in that direction. Now, I mentioned that Canada should be the supplier of choice because we produce oil and gas more responsibly than anywhere else. And we're just getting better and better at it, quite frankly, as evidenced by falling emissions in almost every sector of oil and gas extraction. Here at Peyto, we're leading the way as well, with just half the emissions of the rest of the natural gas industry in Canada. And we're also getting better, continuing to invest in reducing emissions and improving our efficiencies. Again, in 2019, we lowered our emissions. Now, I will qualify that our emissions numbers include more than what is required for current reporting. Reporting regulations continue to evolve, which means we may have to wait for others to catch up in order to be able to properly compare one company to the next using a more standardized measure. But importantly, when we use the same measurement philosophy, we continue to lower our emissions intensity every year, particularly our flared and vented methane. Our goal, of course, is to have no flared or vented methane at all, since, of course, that's the product we're trying to sell. Today, that may not be possible, but hopefully someday soon. With additional technology, we can hopefully achieve that goal. And I can promise you that we will continue to strive to get there one day. Okay, well, that's my own personal promotion of the Canadian energy industry. Now let's focus a little more specifically on Peyto and our strategy. The Peyto strategy has remained the same for over 20 years. We're still a strong believer in natural gas as a superior, affordable, abundant, and cleaner burning fuel for people on this planet. And despite having survived some rather difficult natural gas markets in North America over the past decade, we're still long-term gas bulls. We also believe that with our cost structure and our efficiency, we can provide society with some of the most efficiently produced natural gas and NGLs of anywhere in the world. We strongly believe that any capital we invest must generate a profit. That's the whole point of our business. And we know that cost control in all aspects of our business is how we generate that profit. From day one, our desire was to deliver a superior total return to shareholders, growing our value, income, and assets all on a per-share basis. And over 20 years, I'd say we've successfully done that. Production per share has grown at a compound annual rate of 19%, reserves per share at 14%, funds from operations per share at 13%, and value debt adjusted per share at 11%. Perhaps it's not always nice linear growth, but in all, I believe we've definitely accomplished what we set out to do. Looking over the last 20 years of shareholder returns, we started in 1998 with a share price of just 7.5 cents. To date, we've paid out profits of $19.30 per share on the capital we've deployed. And currently, the market values our prospects depending on where the commodity prices are and on the sentiment of the day. And right now, unfortunately, sentiment about Peyto's future prospects is at an all-time low. Perhaps this is because of a belief that our future prospects are not economically competitive at the current forecast of future commodity prices. We obviously don't agree with that sentiment and feel our future prospects are very competitive and very economic at future prices. Later on in this presentation, we'll endeavor to prove that to you. But perhaps what's even more important than what some may believe is what we've accomplished. And that is demonstrated by our past profits. Back in 2009, for instance, when there was also great fear in the world, there wasn't much belief in our future. But we've gone on to prove that there was, delivering another $10 per share of profit to shareholders. So I think we need to keep that in mind going forward. Perhaps some of the negative sentiment is a question of, can we fund future growth? Again, if our past is any indication, we sure can. Over the last 20 years, we've generated almost exactly the same amount of funds from operations as we've invested in capital programs. In other words, we could have funded all our growth capital with cash flow. Now, we chose to also use some debt and shareholder equity to fund it, but we could have funded it all because Peyto has a very high margin, low cost business that generates significant cash flow. Over the last 20 years, we've averaged a 72% operating margin, which means we've kept 72 cents of every dollar of revenue to use to fund capital programs and dividends. That's one of the highest operating margins in the industry. And that's the reason we've been able to be so profitable. And the reason for the high margin, of course, is because of our low costs. As I said from the start, Peyto is well known for having the lowest cash costs in the industry. And it is those low costs that lead to profits. Peyto generated over $2.6 billion in earnings on the $6.2 billion in capital investments, which is about 40 cents of earnings for every dollar of capital invested. And that is also one of the highest in the industry. And it is out of those profits that dividends were paid to shareholders. Over the last 20 years, we invested $6.2 billion of capital, generated $2.6 billion in profit, and paid out $2.5 billion in distributions and dividends, just like you're supposed to. Shown differently, that 21-year cycle of value creation looks like this. Over the 21 years, we raised $1.6 billion of shareholder equity. We combined that with $1.1 billion of debt and $3.4 billion of retained funds from operations. That funded a total of $6.2 billion in capital investments that have to date thrown off $6.3 billion in funds from operations and $2.6 billion in earnings. Out of that, we flowed $2.5 billion up to shareholders in dividends, rewarded employees with performance compensation, of which they reinvested almost their entire after-tax amount back into the company. And today we're sitting on an amazing asset that at year end was worth $6.8 billion. That's what Peyto's value creation strategy looks like. So in light of the success of that strategy, as we look forward, I don't think we need to change too much. As far as our focus on natural gas is concerned, we still believe in its future. In fact, if you look at North American demand data, natural gas consumption is growing faster than ever. Over the last decade, North Americans have increased their consumption from around 75 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas to over 100, or 32%, which was even faster than the last 2 decades of growth. At this rate, we're likely going to need over 130 billion cubic feet per day of supply by the end of the next decade. That's a lot of new supply growth, and we want to be a part of it. Already in Canada, we're preparing for that supply and demand growth. TransCanada Energy has been expanding their system over the last year and a half and will continue to do so for the next couple of years. That's going to allow Western Canadian producers to expand their supply by almost 40%, if you include the volumes headed to the West Coast for LNG export. The only real question is, how are producers going to fund that growth? Will they use equity, debt, or cash flow? And if it's equity, then share prices are going to have to rise instead of falling. If it's debt, then banks are going to have to start lending money to producers instead of taking it away. And if it's cash flow, then prices will have to rise to provide the funding. Or perhaps, as it usually is, it'll be some kind of combination of all three. So with Peyto's strategy in mind, why don't I invite JP to come up and talk about Peyto's assets a bit and what we did last year. JP?
Thanks, Darren. So just a reminder of where our assets are located. All of our lands, wells, and facilities are located in a 150-mile fairway inside the Alberta Deep Basin. We operate, process, and control almost every drop of our production in this area. And that control is very important when it comes to keeping costs low and margins high. There are multiple stack formations in the Deep Basin, all filled with gas and natural gas liquids, and all lending themselves to horizontal pad drilling efficiencies. Resources in any given section could allow for up to 80 BCF of recoverable reserves. And since each well is recovering around 3 to 4 BCF, that could ultimately be about 20 to 30 wells per section. When we can reuse our surface infrastructure like roads, seismic data, pipelines, well sites, and gas plants for several layers of resource development, not only is it cheaper, but our environmental impact is also reduced. Peyto's been working up and down this stack package of resource for over 20 years, first with vertical wells and now horizontal wells. Last year we were focused on the Cardium Formation, which is one of the shallow formations in the stack. That's because the Cardium has more condensate than the other formations, and with oil prices being much stronger last year than gas prices, the Cardium generated better economic returns. This year we'll be focused more on the Spirit River group, formations like the Notikewin, the Flare, the Woolwich, which tend to be leaner. We also have some blue sky locations to drill this year. But as you can see, we have many, many years of drilling inventory, both recognized and yet to be recognized, that will keep Peyto in business for a long time. Our land position continues to grow every year. In 2019, we added significantly to our land position through crown land sales and deals with other operators. When we consider how many sections of each layer of resource we have, we've only just developed over 10% of our total developable land in the last 21 years. And that means we've got a lot more locations to drill for years to come at our current pace. As you know, Peyto also owns and operates a large midstream asset base of gas processing plants and pipeline networks. They're all sweet refrigeration and compression facilities that we build ourselves. They're all highly efficient, clean burning, low emission facilities that are modular in design so we can maintain low operating costs across the entire life cycle. Our gathering systems and well sites are relatively new, built again by us and equipped with corrosion protection and with a minimal emissions approach to their designs. Despite our already low emissions intensity, we are undertaking a number of methane emission reduction projects such as solar-powered chemical pumps, low bleed instrumentation, and methane capture projects. And to date, we've implemented projects like this at more than half of Peyto's well sites, with an additional 600 projects slated for this year. In total, we have close to 850 million cubic feet a day of gas processing and gathering capacity. Today we're only using about half that, and so we have, in some cases, we've got compression and refrigeration equipment that's shut in to reduce our operating costs. We're also trying to attract other operators in the area to take advantage of our lower costs and bring their production to us. This is especially attractive to operators with ever-increasing unit operating costs due to lack of drilling and higher fixed costs. We're slowly making headway on this initiative and expect to have some significant third-party gas volumes tied into us and processed by our facilities by year-end. And that excess capacity has a lot of value. We can use it to process future Peyto resource beyond our 2P reserves that we've recognized today, or we can use it to process other producers' volumes. If we were to value that potential, even at 50 cents an MCF as a possible processing fee, that capacity would be worth another $1.2 billion of value to shareholders. This next slide is a more fulsome account of our assets and our liabilities. We have $1.4 billion of tangible midstream assets associated with our pipelines and facilities. We have over 800 million BOEs of reserve assets and their associated values, including the 55 million of total future abandonment liability. And of course, our revolving and term debt that will be eventually returned to our bankers. One potential asset that we're working on, which will complement our gas plants in the greater Sundance area, is a storage scheme that we call Big Sunny. We acquired a depleted, highly permeable Viking pool right in the middle of our greater Sundance complex about a year ago, and it's perfect for a proprietary gas storage scheme. There's a sister pool right next door to ours called Big Eddy. It's operated by TC Energy, and that pool has cycled its capacity 5 times in the last decade. We haven't done too much with this pool over the last year, other than some reservoir investigation and some wellbore reactivation, and we also reestablished the permit for the storage scheme because we're waiting to see where the difference between winter and summer gas prices are going forward. There's a new gas-fired power plant being built nearby, which might be suited for a joint venture development of this pool, which would make good commercial sense. So stay tuned. On this map, you can see the location of the power plant. We have an agreement to supply natural gas to this project for 15 years from its projected start date in 2023. The gas-fired project is situated at the end of the only high-voltage power lines in a deep basin which terminate right in our backyard at this hamlet called Bickerdike. What makes this ideal for Peyto is that we can direct connect to it without using any transmission pipelines, and we can avoid the 40-cent toll to get on and off the Nova system. Once complete, this plant is expected to be the largest and most efficient combined cycle power plant in Alberta, producing approximately 62% less CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour than existing coal-fired generation. So we're very proud to be part of that transition to clean and reliable electric power for Albertans for decades to come. But what this map also shows is our optimal geographic location of our entire Sundance area. In addition to power generation, we are located right on CN rail lines, which is perfect for the petrochemical solutions like infill fractionation, propane and butane exports, or even converting our natural gas to methanol and exporting that off the West Coast. We've been in discussions with several third parties for many of these vertically integrated solutions. And one of the things that allows us to consider things like long-term power contracts is our long reserve life. Peyto has always had a very long reserve life relative to the rest of the industry, especially our proven developed producing reserve life, or our PDP reserves. One of the reasons for that is because there's no mobile watering in these deep basin gas reservoirs, so we never have to worry about wells that will water out or end prematurely. What also gives us a long reserve life is our low costs. Our low controllable costs allows us to keep production on longer before it reaches an economic limit. So this long reserve life is a big benefit. Unfortunately, however, oftentimes that future reserve volume is deemed to be valueless when we use high discount rates to bring back future cash flows back to the present. And that's why we often point to the value of our reserves at low discount rates. Not only because the risk is low that these reserves will be recovered, but also when the time comes, they'll be worth something. And here's an example of what I mean by long reserve life and no water production. Here's a couple of Cardium wells in Sundance that have been on for over 10 years. And you can see they're exhibiting a very low decline and will likely produce a very low gas rate for decades to come. As long as we can keep our costs low, they'll keep pumping out cash flow for all that time. Now, a low-rate gas well like this may not seem very exciting or appealing, but it becomes an incredible annuity for our shareholders. And we've got close to 1,500 wells just like this that we've drilled over the last 2 decades. Here's a summary of the reserves that we found over the last 20 years, along with what's been recovered to date. Out of the 6.75 TCF that we've discovered, we've developed over 50% and recovered about half that. And over the next many years, we'll develop the rest and likely add significant additional reserves to be developed. And that's exactly what an organic exploration and production company does or should do. So that's our asset base. Let's spend a few minutes talking about our profitable business and what we accomplished last year. As Darren mentioned earlier, controlling costs and maintaining a high operating margin, that's how we ensure that we're generating a profit. There are 2 components of costs that we control: capital costs and our cash costs. Over the last many years, we've been grinding down our costs, and despite last year's focus on some higher liquid-rich areas that have higher capital costs, we've been headed in the right direction. Last year's F&D costs were higher than the previous year, but the production and revenue associated with those costs was quite a bit higher than the average, and we're not too upset then about our higher F&D costs in 2019. This year, with more of a focus on the leaner gas formations, we should be able to get those costs back down to 2018 levels, or even below, as we're targeting. As you can see, with the majority of our drilling last year focused on the liquids-rich portion of the Cardium fairway, we increased our corporate liquids yield and supplemented our revenue with some more oil-based prices. Out of our 11,000 barrels a day of liquid production last year, the 2019 Cardium new drills made up close to a third of that. So that justified the higher finding and development costs. And actually, if you look at this program in isolation, it generated field netbacks over $3 an MCFE, or in a 2-to-1 recycle ratio. As always, every year we look back at the returns we generated with the previous year's capital program. Last year we drilled 61 gross wells, as I mentioned. Most of those were Cardium with the greater liquids content. We also drilled 3 flare wells, 3 Notikewin wells, 4 Wilrich, and a Blue Sky. The total before-tax internal rate of return for those wells was around 28%, which includes a provision for land and seismic and facility, which total up to the entire $206 million of capital investment last year. Now, that analysis used the actual product prices we received during the year, and then the independent evaluator's price forecast going forward, consistent with how we've done this look back in the past. We shall see if they're in the right, if their prediction of prices is right, but all in all, it's pretty close to what we expected to get from last year's program and at the time when we improved it. In addition to looking back at our economic results, we also like to benchmark our costs against the rest of the industry. And like previous years, Peyto's continued to beat the industry on its cash costs. When we compare it to a basket of gas-weighted producers, Peyto enjoyed an advantage of over $8.50 per BOE, or $1.42 per MCFE. And that's how we made a profit. So in total last year wasn't a great year for us, with ROCE of just 4% and ROE of 8%. But it was also the worst year in our history for gas prices. So as we look forward to better prices in the future, so too should shareholders look forward to better returns. And how we're going to deliver those better returns is to shift the focus of our capital program to the wells that generate the best results in the current price environment. This is just a summary of the different species of wells that we can choose from run at the strip price. As you can see, the leaner gas plays are now rising to the top of the returns ranking as gas prices are outperforming oil prices today. We built our drilling program basically picking from these locations from this list, which should deliver a better return for our shareholders this year. So that's a quick summary of our assets and our performance last year. I'll turn it back over to Darren to talk about Peyto's future.
Okay, well, thanks, JP. As we've indicated, we reduced our capital program for this year a little bit. We originally had a plan for between $250 and $300 million. We've cut that back to about $200 to $250 million. We also cut back our dividend this year to 1 cent per quarter so that we can fund all of this capital program with cash flow. And we decided that as the summer progresses, we'll really decide whether or not we're going to shoot for the high end or the low end of this range as we see gas prices evolve. This is going to be an all-organic program, as usual, drilling wells and tying them into our existing facility infrastructure. We may consider some new land sales later in the year, but for now the Crown has suspended all land sales. As JP mentioned, we do expect to have some third-party processing revenue by the end of the year, with other operators taking advantage of our low costs and our processing capacity in our plants. And as with most companies in the industry right now, we're going to keep an extra close eye on our balance sheet at all times. Production decline we're offsetting this year is forecast at around 23%, which is a lot lower than what we've seen in the past couple of years. It's typically a little bit steeper in the first part of the year and then a little shallower towards the end of the year. And then depending on the capital program that we decide to execute, we should see ourselves holding production flat for about the first half of the year and then maybe some small growth towards the back half of the year, assuming we've seen some gas price strengthening into the last half of the year. I've plotted up the forward price there for AECO, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of exposure to AECO this year. We've redirected a lot of our gas to the NYMEX market in response to a couple of broken years where AECO prices were very weak. So for right now, we're actually really focused on the NYMEX market more than the AECO market. However, if we were to model Peyto's business today at the AECO strip and even this low $30 oil price, we have a very sustainable and profitable business, and that's extremely important. Right now, with just a $2 Canadian per gigajoule gas price and our goals for cash and capital costs this year, we generate close to a 30% profit. Now, we won't likely be getting that this year because revenues are going to be a little less with our exposure to the NYMEX, but we're eventually going to be getting those kind of profits again. And so it's good to know that we have a very sustainable business at strip, and we will once again be there. That's not something that a lot of oil and gas companies can say right now. This slide just illustrates why we're so focused on the NYMEX price with just over 450,000 gigajoules a day of gas production right now. We have a lot of gas pointed to markets that are based on the NYMEX. We've been extremely active hedging though, so we should have some security of price realization at those markets. Once we get to the fall of 2021, we'll have a lot more balanced exposure between US and Canadian markets, a lot more AECO exposure. This big brown block of transportation to Emerson is about halfway down the Trans-Canada mainline, and that gives us access to eastern markets like Dawn. That's just 1 year renewable service though, so not a long-term pipeline commitment, and it's at a lot more competitive cost now with lower tolls. And it's really only 1 year renewable, so we can drop it at 1 year's notice, and if we want to go to a different market, for instance, if we wanted to redirect and go west to the West Coast LNG market. We've also directed some gas to Chicago or Ventura, to the Malin market in California, and of course all the gas above this graph is sold here in Alberta at the AECO market. So we have quite a diversified gas portfolio here, pointed at different markets. Over the last decade or so, we've done pretty well with our diversification and hedging strategy, beating the AECO monthly price in 12 of the last 14 years. So hopefully we can keep that track record going into the future with this new diversification strategy. And in addition to those North American gas market initiatives, we've also kept our options open for West Coast LNG. In 2018, we joined an LNG consortium of 10 intermediate-sized gas producers. This consortium is led by the former Pacific Northwest LNG president, Greg Kist. Currently, they're looking at all sorts of LNG export options for this consortium. So perhaps down the road, we'll be feeding gas to export terminals and ultimately achieve that goal of getting our gas to getting our clean, responsibly developed natural gas to the rest of the world. So that's just the latest on Peyto. Hopefully it's been informative for those watching, and hopefully we'll see you next year in person at our annual general meeting. Bye for now.